Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode in our virtual event series covering the electrification of commercial fleets. I'm Alana Weitzman, Vice President of Strategic Development, Clean Transportation, and Electric Autonomy, and I'm excited to introduce this installment of the EV Fleets Pro virtual event series called Reducing the Risks of Fleet Electrification: When to Bring in the Experts. Before we dive into today's discussion, we're delighted to share a short video from our presenting partner, 7Gen.
Running a business isn't easy, but you do it so well. Every challenge you face, you overcome with resilience and determination. But the switch to EVs seems like a particularly complex one, and you're wondering how you could realize savings for your business, but unsure where or how to start. That's where we come in. Introducing 7Gen, your partner in fleet electrification. We've done this for fleets like yours and multinational delivery fleets across the continent for years. Our team of experts will study and make an assessment of your operations and propose feasible electric vehicle and infrastructure options, getting you the best electric vehicle for your needs from a wide variety of manufacturers and the charging infrastructure that works with it too. Finally, we'll help you make sense of the charging data and use this to sell your carbon credits and generate extra return to help your business case. All of that and more in one affordable monthly bill. At 7Gen, we make switching to EVs simpler and help you attract and retain both drivers and customers, one step at a time. You focus on running your business and let us eliminate the complexity and guesswork of deploying EVs. Give 7Gen a call.
We're grateful to our friends at 7Gen for their participation and support of this discussion. Before we get started, I'll take a moment to acknowledge that our work at Electric Autonomy is conducted from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I'm very happy to introduce you to our panelists now. Shayna Rector Bleeker, Vice President Strategic Partnerships of 7Gen. Mark Marmer, Founder and Executive Director of Signature Electric. And Jason Scoltetti, Senior Key Account Manager with BC Hydro. A warm welcome to all of you. Now, we would also love to hear your questions. The best way to get a question to this fantastic panel of experts is to use the Q&A box in the bottom right of your screen, and we will get to them as many as we can. If you're not asking a question, you can add a comment in the chat box, and I really encourage you to engage with the other attendees. And now on to the topic at hand. I'll kick things off by asking each of our panelists for a quick introduction, and we will start with you, Mark.
Oh, thanks very much. Signature Electric, we're a licensed electrical contractor, so completely agnostic. A good part of our business over the last 8 or 9 years has dealt with electric vehicle charging in one form or another, and fleets is something that's, of course, become recent as the vehicles have become available, and we're providing guidance, but sometimes the actual installation as well. So maybe that's a good bit of an overview anyways.
That's great. Shayna?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are listening from. Shayna Rector, co-founder of 7Gen. 7Gen is a 5-year-old startup, I guess now scale up, that is focused on accelerating the successful deployment of electric vehicles, mostly in medium and heavy duty fleets. So last mile delivery, service fleets in your communities. How do we do that? We say we mobilize the money and the know-how. So the money part is we offer a lease to own arrangement that also then buys in our expertise to support fleets through this deployment of both electric vehicles, infrastructure, and the software layer. So really standing beside customers to try and get through that crunchy bit that I think some of the questions about today are, so that hurdles are not experienced like failures, but they're experienced as learnings and data points to inform your subsequent investments.
That's great. And Jason?
Hi, good afternoon. Good morning. Jason Scoltetti, a Senior Key Account Manager with BC Hydro. I basically help manage our EV fleet program offer that helps our customers electrify their fleets. And for those not familiar with BC Hydro, we are the province of BC's utility, 95% clean electricity to the customers in our province.
Fantastic. I like to hear clean electricity. So I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists to weigh in on this one. What would you say are the most critical points in the electrification process for fleets where it really is essential to enlist experts? Shayna, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. I'm just bringing up an article from a friend here. Yeah, the big points, don't do it too late. It's the first one. And I really characterize it in 4 phases. Right at that visioning moment, so which vehicles, which locations even, i.e. where is there service to back up those vehicles, and where are there wonderful installers like Mark Marmer and Signature Electric to be your first location. So visioning, then your purchasing, then at installation, and then in an ongoing basis in your operations. It does behoove you to have or find a consistent partner through those 4 phases. My reason being is once you get to operations and you do discover a hiccup or something changes in that ecosystem, it sometimes can be tough to go back and understand, what's behind the wall or under the pavement. And if you have someone that's been involved from the start and understand why something is the way it is, it's just easier to troubleshoot, number one. And number two, there's less finger pointing. My friend Teresa Cook over at Siemens always refers to the frame as VISO. So the 4 things to think about being your vehicles, your infrastructure, your software, and then your operations. And she has a lovely quote, which I read here. She goes, basically in a successful fleet electrification, there's 4 mountains we need to collectively climb. And kind of like any tough journey, you might not do a tough hike on your own. You might hire a guide to help with route planning or even to help with some of the gear along the way. She refers to the VISO mountains. Visualize your journey as a trek through those 4 tough mountains. Help visualize the structure, the journey, the decisions you need to make so you can get to the other side, which is a beach where you enjoy a cost-optimized and resilient low-carbon transportation system. Doesn't happen like this. And I guess the key point being just getting a second pair of eyes on what you're purchasing and why you need that, rather than maybe just responding to the loudest vendor or the one that you've seen the most often. Help you think through interoperability and also have someone on your side to just be an advocate for what your operational needs are. If you're only buying 1 or 2 vehicles or 20 chargers and then you call up customer service, it may take some time to get the answers. Your team might not even know the questions to ask. When you work with someone who does this all the time, like we do, it's the only thing we do, you then have an advocate on your side of the table to, navigate through things and get to the good side. I'm sure the other panelists have good comments on that question.
I love that summary. Mark, over to you. Most critical points.
Thanks. Yeah, Shane, about a lot of good points. One thing I want to mention is when you're speaking to somebody like me or Shayna, we're agnostic. We see the whole market. When somebody comes to us at the beginning and they tell us they want this 175 kilowatt charger from this manufacturer, I have no idea. How did they get to that charger, that size? What calculations did they do to get to that? So, the sooner you can come to us, we'll open up the market. We're there to try to help you find the right solution for your situation. I need to hear about the situation. Tell me a little bit about the vehicles. A little bit of the vehicles that you're using now. So we have an idea, both maybe Shayna and I, as to what vehicle is going to be a good fit for that. And then we're going to want to know where you think you're going to park these vehicles so we can have some thought as to how we're going to install the chargers. We may have a comment on that very thing at the beginning, and very likely we're going to be asking you about how long did the dwell time, how long did these units sit? And that's going to be sort of our basics, and we'll take from there. We'll start asking other questions, and I can think of 15 different questions that we'll maybe get to as we go forward. But these are kind of the basics, and we also, I think we get there a lot of time, and you've already done a lot of this. You've got pamphlets and brochures and quotations for chargers and I don't know, software. It just makes it, we have to now turn that all around, calm you down, bring it back to the beginning, ask these questions and get started again. We're happy to do this. Bring us a little early. There's no, it's not a, there's maybe no cost even at the beginning to have just a conversation, see where that takes us, and listen to whoever you're talking to. Does that person sound like they have our interests at heart? Do they seem to be able to answer the questions? Am I dealing with the right person? And maybe we can help you guide your team because we've guided other teams. Okay, I think that was my amount of time for that question.
Jason, I don't know if you want to weigh in. For you, what are the most critical points?
Yeah, I'm just going to leverage what Mark and Shayna spoke to, and the key thing that I advocate for with customers: do the plan, do an analysis. That's exactly what Mark was just speaking to, right? Understand your use cases, your duty cycles, your dwell time, suitability assessment of the EVs. Many utilities engage with them early, like ours. We provide funding to support that study work as well. And I think it's really important to not only look at performance metrics of vehicles and what might work for infrastructure, but also the costs, right? Really understand total cost of ownership and capital costs and what that looks like too. So big proponent to do the plan early on and engage experts like 7Gen and Signature to do that. Yeah.
That's great. Let's sort of flip that around now and chat a little bit about some of the potholes or hiccups that you've seen can really trip up a fleet that goes into this with a little less experience. Jason or Mark?
Sure, no. I think in terms of the project being held up is that they want to think this through right at the beginning, all the way to the end. So I was thinking about buying 3 or 4 vehicles, but as I look through, I think I'd like to increase that by 10% next year, the 10% the year after that. So if I look out, 10 years, I have now 150 vehicles, 5 different kinds, multiple kinds of chargers across 4 or 5 different locations. And frankly, it's impossible to do this because nobody will have these answers for you. We need to scale it back a little at the beginning. And Shayna mentioned it just quietly for a second at the beginning. I caught it. A little chance to get it right or fail at the beginning. The charger we put in was a little too small or it was a little too big. When it's not a big problem when we put 2, 3, 4 chargers in. But when I have 40 chargers, it's a bigger problem and things scale up, right? If I made the charger a little too big, you go, well, that's not a problem. It's fine. The car's charged and our vehicles charge and they charge a little faster. But if I need 10% of that energy here, and now we go back to Jason and we say we need the service to be this big, he goes, oh, that's a problem. But if I had gone back with a slightly smaller service, which could have been perfectly adequate, he might say, and then right back to what Jason was talking about, all of this relates to cost. So if we don't have a chance to do this little bit at the beginning, then we don't have this learning piece. And I mean, I know we hear this all the time. Just start somewhere. Let us get a few vehicles and let us get started. Let us learn and let the team see we're very focused on that little piece being successful. Because when it is successful, it will generate through the drivers, through the finance, everybody will be happy. So we're very careful not to have a fail if we can at that point, but still use it as a learning opportunity. I did that kind of answer the question?
No, I think that's great. And I think I love this idea of scaling up and having someone guide you through, okay, what does a good first run at this look like? And then, where do we go after that without sort of, a 10-year plan with the speed of technology that can cause just massive inertia. So and Mark, I love what you said about find that first win. You can prove it to your organization that this was a good idea. You can prove it to your drivers that this was a good idea, and you generate excitement around a project that, as we've been discussing today, can look very complex. But if you can kind of have that first that first run be successful with great partners, I think it can have significant impact on organizational buy-in. Jason, over to you. You know, from a utility perspective, where do fleets really need to kind of watch out for things that can trip them up?
Yeah, and firstly, I'll say a big advocate for Mark's concepts too of scaling. I think that's really important. Get started now, right? And see how things go and performance-wise. Even if it is a small scale project, there's no better time than now to engage utility to have a conversation, right? And I see some of the pitfalls we're seeing, and nothing's insurmountable, that's for sure. But some of the pitfalls are customers deciding to move forward with a plan without engaging utility and not really understanding the complexities of getting new service to their site that may support their expansion plan, or not understanding the impacts of rates, or not understanding what utility programs might be available to them, right? And so I think there's just no better time to reach out to the utility than when you're starting to think about this type of project and initiative, to have a conversation and see what's available and what support's available from your utility to do that.
You're going to need some of our help to do that, because you're not going to know the question to ask until we do some calculations to figure out what kind of load we think we might want to add. So you're needing this help to even have that communication.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I think an important piece to add here too, you've got a lot of different decision makers around a, frankly, operational transition and innovation like this. And different stakeholders will need different types of information. Your more technical colleagues are going to want real operational data before they are comfortable using any word besides pilot. Whereas your senior executive leaders really doing multi-year fiscal planning are going to want the very detailed roadmap that kindly utilities like BC Hydro contribute towards. But the issue can be in doing that roadmap out to 2030 or beyond, the complexity can just balloon. And the guys over here are going, let me get started. I'm not even willing to like bet on a horse in your 5-year plan until I have data with our own operations. Whereas your senior executives are saying, hang on, if we start this, you know, what are we committing to over multiple years? So important way to say, I'll give 3 examples. One, we did a roadmap for a very large, complex industrial operation now back in 2021. That organization has still not deployed a single electric vehicle. And some of this has to do with how decision-making is being done and how budgeting is being done. And the thing I find so frustrating about that is they've lost 3 years of any operational learning. Contrast that, and I'll give 2 examples. One is a very large fleet and one is a small fleet, because I'm not sure who's listening here. In the case of a large national courier fleet like Purelator, it is now 4 years since they got their first 5 electric step vans in Vancouver, and even more years than that, 8 years since they were going to their first electric vehicle sort of trade shows. They've gone slowly but surely, and every year has brought huge operational learnings that in fact have had them even slow some of their intended deployments this year, part of it just due to practical considerations of older buildings or access to utilities, and others because of gathering data and experience and reflecting on what have we learned in 4 years. And the net of that is they continue to have senior executive support for this. And the fleet manager uses language like, okay, while we've had lots of hiccups and plenty of bumps along the way, this is happening. They work. And he refers to it as, you know, it's like the water going down the beach before a tsunami comes, and they are more prepared for that tsunami than the organization that hasn't done anything for 4 years. Last example, very small fleet here in British Columbia. It is a sort of restoration, post-flood response organization that just frankly has gone on with it. As they have budget, instead of replacing vehicles with combustion engine vehicles, they just keep chipping away. We've got budget EV, we've got budget another charger, and it's been a bit of a Frankenstein approach. Wow, they are years into this and they are celebrated as a leader in their community, opening up their charging during the day to anyone else that needs charging. Maybe they've received vehicles, don't have chargers yet. It is such a success story for them. And their COO there says, you know, Shayna, this is the best marketing we could have ever invested in. They don't spend a penny on marketing. They just spend a penny on getting into EVs. And secondly, they're so experienced now at this. They're got others coming to them for advice. So my thesis here is it's the opportunity cost of doing nothing leaves you same place 4 years from now. Get started.
Yeah, Mark, I'm gonna actually sort of tag you in here to follow up. A lot of fleets hear, oh, EVs are going to get cheaper. Oh, are the charging connectors changing? Maybe I should wait. And there becomes this kind of paralysis around adopting the technology because everybody's hoping that it'll get, cheaper. How do you sort of tell fleets there's a reason or there's an opportunity cost in not moving now?
First of all, I do think some things are simply not going to change. I think to some extent the way we plug in the vehicles are not going to change, and some of the infrastructure that you're putting in, even if the vehicle connector changed, there's still value in that. But I liken this back to how it used to be with computers, right? No matter when you bought your computer, you knew a year or two from now the computer was going to be outdated. The programs were changing so quickly, the memory was becoming cheaper, and you just knew it. So what was the plan? Just never get a computer, because you always know that the next one is going to be somewhat better. Get started somewhere, let it do what you need it to do, and understand that there is a possibility that you might have to make some modifications down the road. When I hear people wanting to tell me that whatever we do today needs to be good for the next 10 or 20 years, I hear these things. I think, I'm sorry, can you even remember what the world was like 10 or 20 years ago? There's things are going to happen that I have no idea or can't even imagine. But at some point or other, you need to get started. And I think that Shayna's right. There's so much value when I see a Purelator truck go by with the big electric plug on the side. There's value in that, and I know that they're somebody who's caring. I think we need that in the organization. If they'll care, they'll get us going. And if we do it incrementally, we probably will not make too many big mistakes.
That's great. I'm now going to have us focused a little bit on financing and cost. We have actually quite a few audience questions around this. I'm going to sort of ask one of our questions that came in during registration. Capital costs are still a major hurdle for electrification. How do we overcome that? And I think, Shayna, I will probably turn to you first for an answer on that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first bit, how does your organization buy? Do you have to buy everything outright, or could you question that? The business model that we developed is one of, if everyone keeps doing what they've been doing, they are not going to have the budget sitting there to get into vehicles that can cost 4 times as much as their internal combustion engine equivalent. Now, I acknowledge that's not the case in light duty anymore. Beautifully, those are starting to become on par with each other. But in the sort of class 2 and above, you do see much more expensive electric vehicles. So if the money's not sitting there to have 4 times the cash to buy the vehicle, let alone have the money to invest in the infrastructure that supports that, then you need to get creative. So the way we have done that is, the first 2 years of 7Gen even existing wasn't deploying vehicles. It was spent talking to bankers, trying to mobilize debt financing for projects like this. And our rationale to them was, listen, you say you have ESG aligned funds. Well, perfect opportunity to deploy those would be to deploy zero emission vehicles and supporting infrastructure. Traditional lenders will say, sorry, I don't know what the residual value of that vehicle will be in 10 years. So nope, we don't lend money to that. So a lot of our time has been spent working with the finance industry to make sense of how and why we should back projects like this. And the net result is we do have lenders that will let us finance the vehicle and the charger. And the model we use is one of lease to own. So instead of having to come up with all that upfront for the vehicle and the chargers, we're basically converting expenditure into an OpEx, which if we do it over 6 to 7 years or whatever the matches up with the warranty on the battery of that vehicle, which is one way of measuring its value. Our clients, in the case of where they're deploying cargo vans or small trucks and supporting infrastructure, are spending with us anywhere from $600 to $1,000 a month over that period. The net is, that's what they're spending on fuel when those vehicles are driving 100 kilometers a day. So there's your business case. We're spending this money any rate. Challenge can be money spent on fuels comes from some operations budget over here. And those that are responsible and accountable for managing fleet might have an infrastructure or a vehicle procurement budget. Those two might not be looked at by the same senior individual or budget. So that's why I opened what I said to you there on how do you buy? How can you get creative? How can you look at the lifetime of this project and understand, in addition to just operational savings like fuel and maintenance, what other measures of value are there for this? And then your business case can make sense. So if reporting on ESGs avoided is valued, if then processing the carbon credits that you do, if you're offsetting an ICE vehicle with an EV, can be monetized and received as revenue into your organization, by zooming out and looking at this over the operation of the asset, you can start to make the numbers make more sense. And in the case of a business model like ours, it's not just about the banking. For us to be a healthy business that's still around in 6 to 7 years to support fleets to the transition, we need a business model that buys in our expertise and keeps us at that table. So if we just did straight up consulting, or you just straight up bought a vehicle from the dealer, you don't necessarily have that lifetime support. So that's the second part of the innovation of this business model.
That's great. Jason, I'm going to turn to you because you're the fuel that Shayna was referring to. And it would be great to hear how you can support fleets on the cost side and what kinds of innovative programs BC Hydro and other utilities could provide.
Yeah, sure. And thankfully that fuel cost in BC is pretty cheap, actually, and clean. I think, any utility out there that's invested in transportation electrification typically will have some resource of funding opportunities like we do, right? If not, typically other governments are supporting that. So BC, we're very fortunate. We have government funding programs. There's federal programs, there's provincial programs, utility programs, all to help reduce those upfront costs, whether it's the vehicle cost or the capital infrastructure cost. And I think just keying in on something Shayna mentioned too is the traditional budgeting process of a fleet needs to be turned on its head, right? And I think that's where we're seeing some education in this segment, because you really need to acknowledge total cost of ownership and what that looks like. And in some customers that we've got going through the fleet program that have done that analysis of the TCO, especially municipalities, they're finding pretty positive numbers, enough to take to a city council as an example to get approval on that budget expenditure. And so, we really need to think about the operational costs, because to Shayna's point, diesel and gas costs here in BC are incredibly high. Your fuel costs for electricity are really low. There's low carbon fuel credits. There's all kinds of incentive programs. Suddenly the business case is starting to make sense, right? A lot of sense. And not to mention that you're reducing emissions and doing this in a clean way. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Actually, we do have a question about the low carbon fuel standard in British Columbia and the federal carbon credit program as well. And I'm going to probably turn to 7Gen for this one as well. How do those carbon credits get sort of baked into a consolidated financing solution?
It's not that they can get baked into them, Ilana, because carbon credits by definition are something that you generate and then trade at the end of a year. So we don't know how much you're going to drive. Is your vehicle going to be out of service? Is your charger going to be out of service? So that's a tricky one to say baked into the financial model. I think it should be considered. I don't live and breathe this every day, and these are complex regulatory pieces. So I'm wondering if I could tag in my colleague, Sophie, to respond further.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Shayna. I mean, it's a very important piece when we talk about TCO, right? Because it is a significant extra revenue, and it can actually even when considering fuel cost savings, maintenance savings, all of that, it can significantly improve the TCO. And yeah, in it, there are basically two factors to understand. So your carbon credit revenue at the end of the year is dependent on the market prices and the utilization, which Shayna mentioned. That latter part, you have some sort of control on. The first part, though, market prices, those are less predictable, especially as we're currently seeing both LCFS and CFR, which is newer, are still kind of volatile markets. They are regulated, but sometimes they're trade, sometimes they're not. And it's uncertain what the price is going to do over the next years. It also has some political aspect there, right? Because it's a government regulated program. And really your decision on whether you go for fixed price offtake versus variable terms, it at the end boils down on your risk tolerance or risk appetite. So a fixed price offtake, it might offer some price certainty, shields you from market volatility, but at the same time, you can also yeah, you could log in a rate that is lower than what we're currently seeing, what the future market will be. So what we have seen on the market currently is mostly spot price selling. So really what the price at that moment is, people are selling at that price. And it has made sense until now, because both on CFR and LCFS, it's an upward trend in the price. So it makes sense to kind of wait bank credits and sell. However, as the market develops, you might consider changing the approach at 7Gen. Yeah, we do. We have favored until now variable price selling, but a hybrid approach might be considered in the future as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sophie. I really appreciate it. I am going to jump into more of our audience questions right now, so I encourage you to use the Q&A. We also have some fantastic questions that came in through our registration form. So one question we get, and I'd love to hear the panel's thinking on this, is can a fleet, given the state of public DCFC level 3 charging, integrate public charging into their plan when they have to travel longer distances? And Jason, I might start that one with you.
Sorry, I was on mute. I'd say it depends. Certainly light duty fleets can access a lot of public fast charging networks. When you get into some of the medium and heavy duty vehicles, sometimes there could be compatibility issues, not to mention, there's no room for them, right? Typically, right? They just don't fit into those spots. We've seen some pretty good horror stories where Class 8 trucks are blocking up an entire parking lot, which is not really welcomed by the property host too often. What I would say to that is, if there's something your fleet's considering, have a conversation with your utility. We have our own fast charger network, and we're currently looking at integrating medium heavy duty compatibility with some of those sites as we're expanding our network. So we're looking for use cases that make sense, right? To understand where those sites might need to go. That I think, currently in Canada anyway, there's probably limited opportunity for that unless you're looking for very specific collaboration with your utility or other organizations to stand that up. But it's definitely growing in the US, right? Certainly in California, there's more and more of this happening, through organizations like Watt EV and Green Lane and a bunch of others that are standing up truck charging sites and depots. Yeah.
That's great. While we're talking about medium and heavy duty, I have a question here on when to focus on municipal, medium, and heavy duty fleet electrification. And I'm doing a little bit of interpretation here, but I wonder if this group can share some use cases where this is working well, where you're seeing municipalities go beyond some light duty applications. Shayna, I'll let you jump in on that one.
Sure, I can start. I mean, this comes from a personal life experience. So to be clear, 7Gen primarily focuses on commercial fleets. We don't do a lot with municipalities, and maybe that will change. Historically, that's been because a lot of municipalities require anyone they work with to have been in business for a number of years, and we're just becoming a 5-year-old company. So maybe that will change. But at any rate, this is anecdotal. Actually, on this past weekend, I was here in Vancouver, and I was out on one of the local beaches, and I spotted the brand new, nearly 1-year-old, fully electric Rosenbauer fire truck that the city of Vancouver has been operating. So naturally, I went up to quiz the crew, and it was interesting. The first statement he led with is, "It's great. It's so quiet." Why is that important? That's important because of safety. And he riffed on that for quite some time. And then I said, well, how do you charge it? And what are the costs? Mentioned they have 2 chargers. They have one level 2 and another one out back. The reason being is they're planning for redundancy. What if one charger goes down? Number 2, he mentioned, what about future planning? Of course, so essential in that segment. But the 2 things that I think are just maybe more broadly relevant for municipal fleets thinking about heavier duty pieces. Number 1, although the hall this is based at has multiple vehicles, and this is by no way doing all of the work of that hall, he says costs per month on fuel have gone down 90%. Why? Most of the calls that hall gets are actually being first responder, quick out and back. That's a heck of a lot of gas to do that stop start to go a few blocks multiple times. When they have those sorts of calls, this is the vehicle that goes. Obviously, if it's a multi-alarm fire, the whole crew is going out, and there are fuel costs there. But that data point was big. The second one he mentioned was there were a lot of skeptics. And 1 year in, even some of the most, he used the word curmudgeonly of those, are seeing the benefits and starting to come along. And that comes back to that question you asked us all earlier around getting started. A lot of the data points for how to inform your future investments and plans are not TCO or finance related. They're not even maybe technical. Yes, things will improve. We know that's the constant point. A lot of the learnings are actually related to people, humans, change management. Is this in the right place? How are we physically putting the charging, connecting the charging port? Is it in the way of something? So that was the big data point. I don't know. Jason, you do this way more than I. There's a lot of fleets working with you every day. Use cases.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of municipalities that are working with us on fleet electrification. And I think a lot of that is driven by their emissions reduction goals, right? I mean, they've got their own internal mandates to reduce emissions, and they're pretty aggressive in BC. And so a lot of them have done the study. And again, it really depends on the use cases and the suitability of EVs and replacement schedules. But we are seeing some movement, definitely in the medium heavy duty space with some of the municipal fleets. If the technology makes sense, if the use case makes sense, the duty cycle makes sense. The other really cool thing that we're seeing in this market is waste collection. And so there's been a bit of movement in that segment as well. And it's pretty exciting to think about the garbage truck that comes rumbling down my alley today, actually, could potentially be electrified in the future, and it's not rumbling down the alley anymore, right? It really depends, again, on those duty cycles, the daily mileages, the weight that their loads are looking like, and where the depots are. But a lot of municipalities are starting to see that those numbers are starting to make sense. Yeah.
That's great. We're coming back to another cost question here. Mark, I'm going to address this one to you. How much does it cost to conduct that detailed feasibility of the charging stations infrastructure assessment and EVSE design? So what should people anticipate when getting into that design and planning process for charging infrastructure?
It's a hard question because I don't always know. You asked like a very simple question that covers a very broad, size of jobs. It could just, frankly, it could be nothing. It could be so simple that somebody just has 4 vans and they want to get one of the vans started, and this sounds like we'll just go out and take a look and that's it. I don't know that we need to be charging them anything. Or they could have a much more complex thing where we're going to start to involve engineers. We're talking about electrical engineers. We may need to start talking to utilities and stuff. But I usually even at that, a few $1,000s will get us started enough to see where we're at, and does it make sense to keep spending more money, or do we need to? So I know I'm not being very specific, but it's hard to, we do look at them sort of case by case. And I think I said it earlier, we're happy to at least hear what you have to say at the beginning, and then be able to, what is it you want to do? What's happening now? What's your vision? Okay, and then we can start talking about, well, that we need this cost, or we might need something like an engineered load evaluation. We hear about this pretty regularly. These tend to be, just sort of an initial peak to see what electricity is available. That can sometimes be even under $1,000. It's not a ton, but it opens up a lot of information, right? Suddenly we have an idea. Is the building fully utilizing all the electricity? How much do we have left? What's going to happen for this little experiment that we want to do? Is there enough even to do that? So sometimes the costs don't have to be all that high. We just like to hear from you, and then we'll try to get these answers more clear for you as we move forward.
Shayna, I think we're kind of similar to what Mark said, and we're getting a little cluster of questions here around this planning process. Like, how do you determine the right charging level and power, and then assess the electrical and civil infrastructure before procuring the chargers? Good that someone's thought about only buying the chargers after the assessment is done, so we're on the right track. But this question of how many chargers do I need for each vehicle, which is another question we've gotten. All of this is kind of bundled into that assessment, and maybe it'd be helpful to have a bit of a top-level view of how that process happens.
There are so many questions in that. Okay. Top-level view, I'll pick up, and then I heard one on deciding on charging ratio. Are those the two main ones? I mean, I think Mark touched a lot on process, and Jason has as well. Obviously, and again, it's back to what I said at the beginning of the call. VISO, what's the vehicle first? What exactly is it doing? Then what is the infrastructure for that? Why do I say those two? I say those two because just because the vehicle has a range of 300 kilometers does not mean it's coming back to your depot with 10 kilometers left every night. In fact, many of our clients have vehicles coming back and they've only used maybe 50% of range in a given day. Yes, let's account for colder weather. Maybe that diminishes another 10 to 20%. But I love Mark's example. Like, what is it really doing? Let's not oversize and overinvest. So those first two. Then the next one is software. And I'm not sure that we've really said why is software important. And some folks may be infinitely deep on this. I saw someone asking a question about which software is best. Again, I'm going to put that question reflexively back and say, why, or what information do you need? So different software does different things. But if I can kind of summarize the 4 whys for software, and I bring this up because lots of clients are all about the vehicle and the charger, and honestly are at a point of decision fatigue when it comes to software. So they're sort of like, oh, whatever comes with the software. Well, no, it can do a few things. Base case, you need some software just to be able to monitor, is the charger working? Is the vehicle going to have enough charge to go out and do its work the next day? Essential. Unless you want to have someone physically sitting there turning on the vehicle and letting you know the status of things, best if you have some remote way of seeing that. Number 2, important for energy management to be able to optimize, okay, is this the best time of day to send a charge to this vehicle? Is this the most costly moment of the day? And actually, is it sitting there all night? Therefore, actually, I could get the charge to go to it at midnight. That's really important. And also then, if you're trying to answer your question on how many chargers to how many vehicles, you're trying to have one charger that might have multiple ports and therefore sequentially charge your vehicles, you're going to have software to tell which one to go when. Those are the first 2. But then, are you also wanting to report on this data for the purposes of ESG emissions reporting or GHGs avoided? Are you then providing that detail on to perhaps a shipper? We've got carriers in this call. An IKEA has a different reporting from a Walmart, has a different reporting from an Amazon. Are you getting the data in a format that you can then send on to them? And also, are you getting the data in a format you can use for carbon credit processing? Last but not least, the future of this transition. is V2X. And this is a world that BC Hydro and Jason and his team are starting to run pilots and testing around. What does V2X mean? It means when those vehicles are not running, what are they? They're effectively a local battery storage. They're storing power. So if not all that power is needed for what that vehicle needs to do next, the ability to draw from that in moments that the grid needs that power is the future opportunity in this. And I'm going to name it. It's also part of the essential part of this opportunity. The why being, right? If we just keep exponentially growing as we do and just use all the power to do all the things we want to do, that myth around we're not going to have enough power does come to be. But if we have software that helps us manage and optimize on energy, it helps us in the future be able to share electrons between stationary batteries and a building or a grid or what have you. Modeling that was done in the UK, and Jason, you may know this research better than I, but I believe it was, if the economy and everything continues to grow at the same rate between now and 2050, they would need 4 to 5 times the amount of power that they have today. If they energy manage, they'd only need 2 to 3 times the amount of power. If they utilize V2X, they'd actually need less power in the future than they are producing today. Did I get that kind of right, Jason?
Sounds right.
Right, but the point on how many chargers per vehicle, again, it's got to be the use case, but it's very few cases where it has to be one vehicle to one charger. Often you can get more creative than that. And often you don't need a DCFC. You do have enough downtime in a day to meet your needs. And then maybe this is where in the future, utilities are planning, and there are some DCFCs on strategic routes for, emergency top-ups, but I don't know, more comments on that part of the question?
It's great. And I love that you touched on V2X, because we have a question here about the potential benefits of bidirectional fleet charging. So appreciate you weighing in on that. Jason, I wonder if we could go a little bit deeper into that one, because I know that BC Hydro actually has a new program around what Shayna was referring to on the storage side, and how that kind of clicks in with fleet charging and running an electric fleet. So I'll ask you to share a little bit more around that.
Yeah, and the scenarios that Shayna described about what we call DSM traditionally, or demand side management or demand response, are becoming really important to utilities because of the growth of electrification, especially here in BC because of the clean electricity benefit, right? So we have lots of, not just transportation, but lots of industries that are electrifying. And so what we're really focused now on is, we don't just want to help you get connected. Of course, we want to do that too through our funding programs and our fleet programs. But how do we collaborate with an organization to efficiently use your power at your site? And so to that end, we have programs for managed charging that we support with customers. Can we help level the charging loads and look at your entire facility and what the power requirements are? And we've just introduced in the last 2 weeks a battery storage incentive. And so this is where BC Hydro will work with a customer to deploy a grid scale battery behind the meter, where part of that battery is nominated for BC Hydro's use, and the rest of it is to help mitigate and manage energy efficiently at the customer site. And so when you think of fleet, and Shayna and Mark both spoke to these scenarios, a lot of that's overnight charging, which is actually in our case off peak. And so, really synchronizes nicely with storage solutions, where we could help a customer stand up a battery. They can use that, maybe mitigate any need for new service or minimize the capacity requirements at their site, efficiently use that power. And then when BC Hydro needs to draw down on that to help balance grid loads and peak demand, we can leverage that battery asset as well, working with a customer. So this is where I see the fleet electrification program really blossoming and growing, and it's the new segment that really gets me excited. Is can we work with a customer to really efficiently manage their charging and the power requirements at their site by looking at the entire solution and the entire integrated system.
Super exciting. I want to sneak in a question for Mark that's a very specific question around cellular connectivity. I imagine there are some places where cellular connectivity can become unstable. And so how do you manage that during operations?
So this is, you heard Shayna talk about software. So don't forget that the charger somehow has to talk to this software. So this reliability is very important. The reliability in general is important, but if you think it's important by the side of the road, believe me, if it's for your fleet, it's really important. So you're correct. Sometimes a lot of these new facilities end up sort of something that was a farmer's field, a year ago, and the cellular connectivity is not as ideal. So some of the things that we'll do is provide a redundancy. So we could do a variety of things. I could have a series of fallbacks. It could fall back to a Wi-Fi system. It could be hardwired as well with back to the customer's LAN. So, or we could choose to one of these to be the primary one and another one to be secondary. And we actually do have this at several locations so that this, as we're sort of doing these ESG credits and things of that nature, this reporting is very critical. They're very concerned about it. So we'll do that. A lot of times it's just fine, but I like to have a second option. And some of the chargers have this actually built into it. You can just simply have them, if it's not getting this signal, it'll do that signal. And we talked just briefly, Shayna mentioned redundancy in general. We put in a series of chargers, and then we put another charger off to the side. Well, there might be a point where we need to service these chargers or something went wrong with it. What's the B plan? How am I going to provide you with a level of comfort that you could still charge the vehicles? So, this does come up, and sometimes it's not a gigantic amount to do this. So we're looking at redundancy in a variety of ways. And the question you're asking is a good question, because if you don't do this, it's impossible that you're going to think of this, because you're just not coming by it every day. As you start moving through this system to electrify, we're going to get to this question eventually. We're going to ask you about that. Maybe we're doing some testing at the site to see what the cellular connectivity is. It's just I think Shayna said before, there's a lot of questions that you just can't ask because you don't even know to ask them. I think that's where this, going back to where the whole thing is about, where you're bringing the experts in for. I think it's something you would do in any other kind of a arrangement. Bring experts in for that because of their knowledge. Bring them in here too. And this is a complicated a piece that you don't see all the bits and pieces of.
I'm going to ask each of you a great audience question here around what are your success stories for fleets you've seen who've done great work. Shayna, you've referred to a few of them. I'd love to have Jason and Mark and Shayna 1 minute each as we wrap with a great example of a successful fleet. Jason, I will turn the baton over to you first.
Okay, well, I'll give a customer example. I think it's okay for me to do so because it's out there running around. One of our first customers that went through our infrastructure incentive fund, so we helped, provide some funding to get them started, was the Brick, which is the big retailer. So they've got 6 Class 6 line trucks running for local deliveries. And the reason why that one pops into my head, literally a few weekends ago, I was looking out my front window and my neighbor had a refrigerator delivered with a electric Class 6 brick truck with zero emission stuff all over it, which is really exciting to see it in your neighborhood. And to Shayna, I know her customers at Go Bolt. I've seen them in our neighborhood too. So to actually see this stuff out in the wild and doing what it's supposed to do is really great.
Mark?
I'm going to defer to Shayna because some of the jobs, just like you talked about Go Bolt, are partnerships that we do together. This is a very common thing here at Signature Electric. We're brought in often to work with somebody, and it's not necessarily our job and our customer at the beginning. It could be. It just depends. Often it's a partnership that's coming sometimes from a manufacturer, sometimes from a charger manufacturer, sometimes somebody like a 7Gen. So I'm very hesitant to somehow take credit for these, which it sounds like I do when I do that. I will let the people that bring the customers to begin with and to the table, and maybe I'm positive that Shayna's got some good stories for us.
Yeah, I guess too, on that Bolt one, since you both mentioned it, why is that a success? It's a success because the ultimate client of that fleet is IKEA. And them being firm and patient in equal parts on their zero emission delivery target is the key. So they say by 2025, 100% of their last mile deliveries will be by zero emission trucks. They are woefully behind that target in North America for reasons of, we don't have the regulatory stick. We do have incentives, but we don't have the regulatory stick. Fuel is cheap. I know many people on this call in North America will disagree with me, but vis-a-vis what you're paying in Europe, it is cheap. And so the urgency to act isn't here. But when the person that pays for your services says, this needs to happen or we won't pay for your services, then the fleet stays at the table. And the fleet has stayed at the table through facility relocations. Yep, we started, Mark, we've lived this one together.
For sure.
Installing charging infrastructure, business constraints, real life things around landlords and where you need to operate from changed. Well, we have to take everything out and put it in another location. I couldn't have budgeted for that in the infrastructure plan for you. Nor could we have articulated what the exact cost of that would be. We didn't even know where the second location would be. So it is a success because the party playing for it, or in the case of municipalities, your climate action targets, stayed firm, yet patient. The other example I'd like to share, just you want successful fleets, Fresh Prep, the meal delivery service is a client of ours. Small, growing business, cost-constrained world. They obviously expanded a lot over COVID when we all wanted their services, and then now it's a different time. They deployed a bright drop vehicle through us, and the success of that, because of the alignment with the rest of their message, they claim to be the most sustainable, zero packaging meal delivery company, and actually give you the option, to get your delivery by zero emissions. The alignment for them is winning them more customers. Number two, in a gig economy where you can get another job somewhere else, or you can use your own private car to deliver things, it can be very tricky to retain good drivers that align with your brand experience and really deliver things the way you want them to. Well, their driver says, they put me back in an internal combustion engine vehicle, I quit. So they've ordered a few more brake drops. Great success story.
Oh, that's great. And with that, we're at the end of our Q&A segment of today's session. Shayna, Jason, and Mark, a huge thanks to you all for sharing all of your insights and your knowledge with our audience today. And thanks as well to you, the audience, for all of the excellent questions that took this conversation further. I would like to say again, a big thanks to 7Gen for sponsoring this event and for being great partners in the EV Fleets Pro program. I also want to say, if you're not familiar with our EV Fleets Pro program, it is an online course for fleet managers and operators who want to take the first steps towards electrifying their fleet. It is completely free. And the good thing is you'll get all kinds of invitations to live and virtual events like this one. And we have a great bank of recorded sessions again, for this virtual series that are on the site as well. So if you haven't already, I hope you'll check it out after our session today and sign up at evfleets.pro. And again, taking the course is completely free. So thanks, everyone. I know we've run a little tiny bit over time. Thank you for being here with us today, and have a wonderful day.